There's an amazing story, a fascinating story in Jeremiah chapter 35. Jeremiah is my favorite of the prophets, primarily because it's easy for me to relate to Jeremiah, I think. Jeremiah had his ups and downs. He's known as the weeping prophet. He had amazing successes, and he had some pretty dismal failures in the work that he did. But God told him that as a young man, before he even started prophesying, that they wouldn't listen and that they would persecute him. So Jeremiah has a long life of very challenging work that he does for God, leading up to the destruction of the city of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple. And in Jeremiah chapter 35, Jeremiah brings in, at the command of God, a group of people called the Rechabites. The Rechabites are interesting people. They've been around, and they've been part of God's story for a long time. The Rechabites go back hundreds of years, as a matter of fact. And in the work that Jeremiah is doing, he uses a lot of object lessons. And so the Rechabites are brought into a room in the temple. And God tells Jeremiah, you bring the Rechabites in, and you have wine in this room. And when the Rechabites come in, I want you to offer them wine to drink. And so the Rechabites come in. The Rechabites are brought into the room, and Jeremiah offers them the wine, and they refuse. And the reason that they refuse is because they have made a vow. Look if you have your Old Testaments with you, in Jeremiah chapter 35. And let me get some pages unstuck here. Jeremiah chapter 35. When he offers them the wine, it says in verse 5, I set before the Rechabites pitchers full of wine and cups, and I said to them, drink wine. But they answered, we will drink no wine. Well, highlight that in your Bible. That's a good thing to say. We will drink no wine. But they say, we will drink no wine. Why is that? Because, they say, Jonadab, the son of Rechab, our father, commanded us, you shall not drink wine, neither you nor your sons forever. And not only that, but verse 7, you shall not build a house, you shall not sow seed, you shall not plant or have a vineyard, but you shall live in tents all your days, that you may live many days in the land where you sojourn. Now please understand that those instructions don't come from God. Those instructions come from one of their forefathers. As a matter of fact, those instructions, the amazing thing about this is those instructions had been given to the Rechabites some 200 years before this story takes place in Jeremiah chapter 35. Their father made them vow, one of their forefathers made them vow, you will not drink wine, you will not plant crops, you will not build houses, you will live in tents all the days of your life. Now they are in the city of Jerusalem at this time, but the reason they bring their tents into the city of Jerusalem is because Nebuchadnezzar's coming. And they are afraid of the Babylonians, so they've come inside the walls for safety. But they're still living in tents. And so they refuse to drink wine. And Jeremiah is going to use that as an object lesson. God's going to say, listen, here's a group of people who are doing something, diligently doing something, that a forefather, that a human being instructed them to do 200 years ago. Do you realize how long a period of time 200 years is? This country isn't much older than 200 years. Now, what I would suggest to you is, now the object lesson, of course, is God says to the Israelites, I've been sending prophet after prophet telling you to do something and you won't do it. And here are the Rechabites, and they are still honoring a vow that they made to their father 200 years ago. What I would suggest to you is that is peculiar behavior. That is peculiar behavior. The fact that they have honored this vow for 200 years and that they're still honoring the vow. And by the way, if you have a chance later on tonight or sometime tomorrow, read the rest of Jeremiah chapter 35. God commends them very highly for this. And he promises them that their line will continue because they have kept this vow that was made some 200 years prior to this. It's frustrating to God. I send prophets, I give you instructions, and you don't do it. But these people have. That behavior, though, is peculiar. And that's what I want to talk about for a few minutes in the lesson tonight. I want to talk about what Peter says in 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 9. And this is only found, this word peculiar is only found, as far as I know, in the King James translation of the Bible. But in the King James translation, in 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 9, Peter says, "But ye are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a peculiar people, that you should show forth the praises of him who hath called you out of darkness into his marvelous light." Different translations render that word differently. The word peculiar has been completely done away with in this day and age. So you have in the New American Standard a people for God's or his own possession in the English Standard Version, his own special people, the New King James says, God's own people, the New Revised Standard says. And I would suggest to you that all of those are good translations. But this is one of those times when I really think the King James translators give us more insight into what's being said than the newer translations do. The word peculiar means strange, odd, uncommon, unusual. And I really like, and by the way, this is not a biblical definition of a Greek term from Thayer's or Vine's. It's dictionary.com. But the last part of that definition, distinctive in character from others. The Rechabites were certainly distinctive in character from the Israelites among whom they were dwelling at that period in time. They were so distinctive in character that God uses them to teach as an object lesson, to teach a lesson to the Israelites. The Israelites don't get it, or they don't accept it, or they don't buy it, or they don't act on it. But the Rechabites are so different. They're so distinct. Who keeps a vow that was made by a forefather 200 years before? I could tell you a lot about one of my grandfathers. My other grandfather died when I was very young. I could tell you a lot about one of my grandmothers. My other grandmother died when I was very young. I can tell you a little bit about all of my great-grandparents. I know a little something about them. I know where all 8 of them are buried. But beyond that, I can't tell you anything about my family at all. I had a gift subscription to Ancestry.com. I built a family tree. I got lost in the limbs and finally gave up. At some point, I was looking for a Civil War or Revolutionary War ancestor who was a hero. I kept finding deserters and criminals and people who were drummed out dishonorably. I finally just gave all of that up. I don't know what vows my great-great-grandfathers made. And if I knew that my great-great-grandfather had made some kind of a vow, I promise you, I wouldn't feel any obligation to keep that vow. Wouldn't necessarily feel any obligation. And here are the Rechabites, 200 plus years have passed since one of their forefathers had made his family promise, we will not drink wine, we will not plant crops, we will not buy land, we will not build houses, we will live in tents, and they were still doing exactly what their ancestor had told them to do. That behavior was distinctive from other people. And that's what the word peculiar implies. And I'm not sure we get that from a people for his own possession. Again, I'm not criticizing the translation, but I'm not sure we get that same understanding, that same meaning. But the word peculiar, that means something to us. And it means something to us because most of us really don't want to be thought of as peculiar. And we go to great lengths, as a matter of fact, to keep somebody from thinking that we are peculiar. When we choose the clothes that we wear, when we choose how we style or cut our hair, when we choose the kinds of activities that we engage in. Really, we as human beings are the most comfortable when we can just kind of blend in, for the most part. We don't want people to think that there's anything different about us. And I believe what Peter is telling us here is it is absolutely essential that somehow, on some level, in some way, God's people must be seen as different. They must be seen as distinctive in character from other people, perhaps strange or odd or uncommon or unusual. And what I wonder is this. Would the people we know well, our family who aren't Christians, our neighbors who are not Christians, the people with whom we work or the people with whom we go to school who aren't Christians, if they looked at us, would they notice anything at all about us that is different? Anything at all about us that is distinct? Anything at all about us as peculiar? Or do we carry that desire to blend in even to covering up our faith? Would we be embarrassed for the people with whom we work to know that we are different, that we are intentionally different? Because we made a vow to our Father in heaven. And that vow was to live a distinctive life. And that's what I want us to think about for a few minutes in the lesson tonight, is what it means to be a peculiar people. Why were these people that Peter writes about in 1 Peter chapter 2 a peculiar people? They were a peculiar people because they belonged to God. There is a sense in which every human being belongs to God, right? There is a sense in which it is right to say every human being is a child of God, because God is the creator of all things, and God makes us. There is a sense in which that's right. But the New Testament very seldom, if ever, uses that idea or approaches a person's relationship with God in that way. God is said to be the Father in the New Testament of a very distinct and separate group of people. A group of people who meet certain conditions. A group of people whom He purchased at a very high price, the price of the blood of His Son. And a group of people who have made a commitment to Him, just like the Rechabites did, to honor the vows, to honor the commitment, to be distinct. They were peculiar because they belonged to God. They were peculiar because God has always wanted His people to be different from the world in which they live. Look at 1 Peter chapter 4. Just if you're in 1 Peter 2, turn over a page or two to 1 Peter chapter 4. An interesting passage here. Clearly, this is on Peter's mind, going all the way back to chapter 1. It is on Peter's mind. Peter is near, I think, the end of his life when he writes this letter. And these are things that he wants to say to them before he dies. He wants to remind them of some of the things that he's already told them. And so he calls them a peculiar people in chapter 2. And then in chapter 4, he says this, beginning in verse 3. For the time that is past suffices for doing what the Gentiles want to do, living in sensuality, passions, drunkenness, orgies, drinking parties, and lawless idolatry. By the way, just a little sidebar here. Let me stop there before I go on. It's not uncommon to hear people in the world say, and it's becoming, unfortunately, more common to hear people who profess to be Christians say, the Bible does not condemn the use of alcohol, the recreational use of alcohol. It only condemns drunkenness. Well, Peter mentions alcohol in 3 different categories in verse 3. He talks about living in sensuality, passions, drunkenness. There's the drunkenness. And so the abuse of alcohol. Orgies. The definition of that Greek term is that this is a party where the purpose of the party, essentially the purpose of the party, is drinking. And the first thing that always comes to my mind is like a fraternity or a sorority party. Why do they have parties? Not to, get to know each other, not to connect socially. They have parties so they can drink, and so they can drink to excess. That's the orgies. And then drinking parties. And the interesting thing about drinking parties is the drinking party in the Greek term that's translated drinking party, is not a party necessarily where drinking is the purpose. It is a party where drinking takes place. And there's no necessary inference that drunkenness is a part of it. You think about a cocktail party. Think about an office Christmas party where maybe, somebody, or maybe a wedding where we're going to pour a little champagne, and we're not going to drink to excess. We're not going to get drunk, but we're going to raise our champagne glasses, and we're just going to have one drink. And what's wrong with having one drink? What I want you to understand is, if you hear somebody make the argument, the Bible only condemns drunkenness, remember and remind them that that's not true. Peter condemns drunkenness. He also condemns parties where drinking to excess is the purpose of the party. He also condemns just casual drinking parties. It is amazing to me how many pictures I see on the internet. Selfies sometimes, or sometimes they're group pictures. And why is it that people think that they need to be seen holding a glass of wine in their hand in the picture? Or they need to be seen holding a can of beer in their hand in the picture. And unfortunately, I've seen Christians in some of those pictures down through the years. So that's my sidebar. I won't charge you anything for that at all. That's not my point. My point really is verse 4. With respect to this, they, the Gentiles, are surprised when you do not join them in the same flood of debauchery, and they malign you. Now think about the definition of the word peculiar. Different, odd, strange, distinctive in character. Listen, there's something about the conduct of a Christian that is going to make people in the world uncomfortable. And it will make them uncomfortable enough that some of them will even mock you. Some of them will even criticize you. Some of them will even try to embarrass you. That's the point. That's what peculiar means. That's why I like the King James translation, especially of this Greek term in 1 Peter chapter 2. You are a peculiar people. You are different. God has always intended for his people to be peculiar. And they were peculiar because God wants his people to be separate from the world in which they live. Come out from among them and be separate. Don't be unequally yoked together with unbelievers. God doesn't intend for us to get too close to people in the world. We are in the world, but we are not of the world. God intends for our behavior to be different. And please listen carefully to this. I don't think I can say this clearly enough. I don't think I can stress it enough that this different behavior needs to be something that can be seen and noticed by the people who live around us. And if we are living among people in the world and our conduct, our language, our choices don't cause them to raise their eyebrows and say, there's something different about that person, there's something different about that family, then I think we need to seriously reassess what our relationship with God is. I want to do two things here in the time that I've got left. I want to approach this from the negative, and then I want to turn it around and approach it from the positive. New Testament Christians were not peculiar in some things. For example, New Testament Christians were not peculiar or different in what they ate. Now, the Jews were. And in my opinion, can I throw an opinion out there, and you can knock it out of the park if you want to? I have heard all of my life that the reason that God gave the dietary laws that he gave is he was trying to keep them healthy. And there was a book that was a runaway bestseller back in the 1970s. I think it's still in print. And the title of the book was None of These Diseases. The idea was that the dietary laws that you find mostly in the book of Leviticus, that those dietary laws were health laws. God was trying to keep them healthy. If that's true, why did those unhealthy things all of a sudden become healthy when you get to the New Testament? You know, why is Peter told that all the things in that sheet that he saw in the dream that were let down from heaven, all of a sudden those things are clean? I don't think, now there may be some health benefits to some of the dietary strictures. I don't think that's had anything to do with the point. Those dietary laws come in the book of Leviticus. And what is the theme of the book of Leviticus? God says, be holy, for I am holy. God wanted the Israelites to be distinct from the people around them. Well, what is one of the ways that you can be distinct from other people? How about what you eat or what you don't eat? Listen, when I go somewhere to eat and on the menu is, you know, good barbecue, good catfish, everything fried, the pickles even are fried. And one of the persons in the group I am with says, I think I'll just have a salad. I'm thinking there's something wrong with that. That's different. It's noticeably different, right? Salad is fine. If you want to eat, you know, grass and weeds, that's fine with me. But it's different. You understand what I'm talking about. And if you do that, if you are at a table of passionate meat eaters and you're only eating a salad, they're probably going to tease you about it, aren't they? Somebody's going to say something. Now, you know, that's innocent and that's fun and we can laugh about that, but that's exactly the point that's being made. When the Israelites come into the Promised Land, listen, the Canaanites eat all kinds of things, and some of the things they eat are associated with the gods that they worship. So, to make sure that they know that you are different, that you are peculiar, I'm going to give you a menu. I'm going to tell you some things I'm not going to let you eat, and some things I am going to let you eat. But that changed. That law was nailed to the cross. And in the New Testament, forbidding to eat things that had been given by God is condemned. And I'm not going to take the time to turn, but we find in passages like 1 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 5, some who were forbidding things to eat that God had made holy. 1 Corinthians chapter 8, some who had conscientious scruples about eating meat. And especially if that meat had been offered or served in an idol sacrifice in a temple the night before, they had scruples about it. If you had known a Christian in the first century and you'd had an opportunity to eat with them, you would not have noticed anything necessarily peculiar. They would have eaten what everybody else ate. There were no dietary restrictions. They were not peculiar in physical appearance, and by that I mean there was no particular style of dress, assuming modesty. And in some places that might, modest attire might very well have made them seem peculiar to the people among whom they were living. But assuming that, there is no specific attire. I'm afraid that our friends among the Amish and the Mennonites have misunderstood or misinterpreted this idea that God wants us to be peculiar. And so we need to dress in a way that makes us completely separate and distinct from other people. There is no New Testament basis for that. And so the Christians who lived in Corinth, if they were out on the street, they would have been dressed just like we are. So you're in Corinth in the first century and you're going to the Walmart in Corinth and, you get on your chariot or, you hitch a ride on a camel or you do whatever and you go to the Walmart and somebody sees how you're dressed. They would not have said there's a Christian. They would not have said there's a Christian. Again, assuming that what they're wearing is modest attire. They were not peculiar in what they wore. They were not peculiar in what they did either. We find Christians in the first century doing all kinds of things, making a living: tent makers, merchants, slaves. One of the interesting things to me about slavery, and I've been reading some about this in other contexts in the last month or so, there were lots of slaves in the world in the first century. The vast majority of them, scholars believe, the vast majority in the first century of people who were slaves because they chose to be slaves. They sold themselves into slavery. And the reason was because there were no jobs. And they had families to support. And so one of the ways that they could support their families is they could sell themselves and maybe even their entire family into slavery. One book that I read suggested that there might have been as many as 6 million slaves in the city of Rome. The vast majority of them, scholars believe, were not slaves who had been captured in some kind of a battle or some kind of a war. There were people who sold themselves into slavery. It was considered to be a way to make a living, a way to provide for your families. And so their occupations were not distinct, assuming that they were doing things that they had a right to do. There were some occupations in the first century that a Christian couldn't do. And let me tell you something, brethren, there are some occupations in the 21st century that a Christian has no business doing either. And if you want to discuss that further, Chris would be happy to share some of it. No, it's not my point in the lesson, but there are things, there are jobs. I will just throw out being a bartender. I suspect that if you are very skilled at mixing drinks, as a matter of fact, they call the really good bartenders mixologists, that you could probably make a lot of money. You think it would be okay for a Christian to be a bartender? Would it be okay for a Christian woman to work in a strip club? Where perhaps just in tips she could make enough money to support her family for a whole month? Would that be okay? You understand, I'm trying to be extreme. You understand what I'm saying? There are some jobs in the first century that a Christian couldn't do and maintain their relationship with God, but there are jobs in the 21st century that a Christian couldn't do, assuming that you have the right to do it. Christians would have been doing all kinds of jobs. So how were they peculiar? I want to suggest a few things to you, and the lesson will be yours. How were they peculiar? How are they different? I'm going to keep using the King James word. How were they peculiar? Well, one thing is that they were peculiar in faith. I'm sorry, they were peculiar in name. I'm looking at further down on my notes. They were peculiar in name. In Isaiah chapter 62, actually from about Isaiah chapter 50 to the end of the book of Isaiah, what Isaiah is doing is he is describing for the Israelites what's going to happen when the Messiah comes. When the Messiah comes, everything's going to change. There's going to be new worship. There's going to be a new covenant. And in Isaiah chapter 62, he tells them that one of the changes is that there will be a new name that God's people will wear. A new name. And that name, he says, will be given by God himself. If you look at the New Testament, what is the fulfillment of that prophecy? If someone were to ask, what is the most common designation of God's people in the New Testament? If we were in a Bible class and I asked that question, you would know the answer, right? It is disciple. The word disciple is used dozens and dozens and dozens of times. Is disciple the new name that God gave his people that would distinguish them or make them peculiar? Well, it can't be. The word disciple was a common designation. And there were disciples of people. There were disciples of rabbis. And so disciple is not it. There are other things that God's people were called in the first century. But there is only one distinct name. There is only one peculiar name, and it's only found three. As a matter of fact, it is so peculiar that it's only found 3 times in the New Testament. And so in Acts chapter 11 and verse 26, the disciples were first called Christians in Antioch. Luke doesn't say the enemies of the disciples called them Christians in derision. I don't know how many times I've heard that in Bible classes. Well, they were called Christians by their enemies. Luke doesn't say that. All he says is they were called Christians. In Acts chapter 26 and verse 28, Paul is preaching. And the responses I think the English Standard Version really gets the nuance of the response correct. Are you trying to persuade me to become a Christian? Agrippa says. Are you trying to persuade me to become a Christian? He knows that name. In 1 Peter chapter 4 and verse 16, if anyone suffers as a Christian, let him glorify God in that name. The word Christian is the distinct name. And we know from historical writings late in the first century and all through the second, third, and fourth century that Christian is the name by which these people became widely known. They became known as Christians, followers of Christ. They wore the name Christian. Let me suggest something to you here, and I don't want to belabor this, and I certainly don't want to embarrass anyone. I don't want to sound overly critical. But when someone asks me, what are you religiously? Might I very gently and kindly suggest to you that Church of Christ is the wrong answer? Church of Christ is what we call local groups of people who assemble together who wear the distinct name Christian. But we are not Church of Christ. Sometimes somebody will come to me and say, Gary, I'm having a discussion with somebody. What does the Church of Christ teach about so-and-so? And I try to be gentle. I promise I do. But my response, for a long time, my response has been, I don't know what the Church of Christ teaches about that. And to be real honest, I really don't care what the Church of Christ teaches about that. What I want to know is, what does the Bible teach about so-and-so? I am a Christian. I happen to be a member of a local body in Bowling Green, Kentucky that calls itself a Church of Christ. But that's not what I am. And that's not what the fulfillment of the prophecy is. The fulfillment of the prophecy that God would give them a new name, and that name is Church of Christ, is a misunderstanding. We are Christians. You want to really mess up the Mormon elders when they come knock on your door? You want to really throw a curveball to the Jehovah's Witnesses who come and knock on your door? When they press you to find out where you go to church, what you are religiously, you just keep insisting, I'm a Christian. I'm just a Christian. They're not ready for that. They've got I promise you, they've got a presentation ready. If you say Church of Christ, they've got a presentation ready. They don't have a clue what to do with somebody who just claims to be a Christian. I am a Christian. If I'm going into the hospital, if I'm filling out a government form and they want to know what my religious affiliation, which, by the way, I think technically, legally, they can't even ask anymore. But if they do, and it says, this, and this, if it's not on there, I'm going to write in Christian. Okay, we're all Christians, but what kind of Christian are you? Well, I'm a New Testament Christian. I'm a follower of Christ. I wear his name. I believe that is the name that God promised, that peculiar, distinct name that God promised to give his people. They were peculiar in faith. Romans chapter 1 and verse 8, Paul says to the church at Rome, to whom he's writing some very challenging and hard things. He says, first, before I do that, I think, before I get into the really meaty things that I need to talk to you all about, first, I thank my God through Jesus Christ for all of you because your faith is proclaimed in all the world. They were peculiar in faith. Their faith was strong. Their faith was so strong that they were even willing to suffer for their faith. Their faith was so strong that many of them were even willing to be imprisoned for their faith. Their faith was so strong that many people in those first few centuries were gladly willing to die for their faith, their conviction, their belief that Jesus is the Son of God, that the Bible is the inspired Word of God, that we have this revelation from God that teaches us how to become Christians, and that it also teaches us how to live as Christians. They were living their faith. Listen, people who know me know, and if people know me well, they know a lot of things about me. They know where I was born. They know that I am a Hoosier, even though I can't tell anybody what the name or word Hoosier means. That's where I was born. They know where I went to school. They know that I went to Florida College for a while. They know that I went to the University of Alabama. They know something about that. They know things about me. But let me tell you, if that's all that the people I know, and especially the people I know of, things like that, if that's all they know about me, then shame on me. If they didn't know any of that about me, it is imperative that they know that I believe with all my heart that Jesus is the Son of God, and that the Bible is the Word of God, and I will not compromise my faith for anything at any time, for anyone at any time, and that includes my family. I will not lay down my faith. One of the things that those of us who live in Bowling Green have been very blessed and very privileged to work with a number of college students down through the years, and the folks here who live in Bowling Green who have worked with those college kids, they will understand exactly what I'm talking about. If young people come to Bowling Green and they enroll in Western Kentucky University, a very liberal, and I mean extremely liberal, educational, state-run, federally funded institution of higher learning, and they go up on that hill, and all the faith they've got is just a little bit of their parents' faith that they bring with them to campus, they are in trouble. They are in trouble. If they don't walk up on that hill with their own faith, they're going to be in trouble. And so we work, brethren in the churches in Bowling Green, all of the churches in Bowling Green with whom I am acquainted, who work with the college kids, that is one of our goals. We work very hard to try to help them develop their faith, their own faith. And listen, if you have that kind of faith, that's going to make you peculiar. They were peculiar in how they lived their life. We've already read 1 Peter chapter 4 and verse 3. They would not have gone to some of those movies that some of us go to. They would not have played some of those video games that some of us played. They would not have worn some of the things that some of us wear. They were determined that they were going to live their life in such a way that the world would see it and people would think they were strange. People would think they were peculiar. They will mock you, Peter says. Have you ever been mocked for being different? Have you ever been questioned? Have you ever been ridiculed? Or, and this is an important personal question. I'm not looking for answers from anybody but me. But if something were to happen to you, would the people that you know well, would they even know that you were a Christian? Would they have a clue that you are a Christian? Would anything about your life in the office, in the factory, in the neighborhood, in the classroom, would anything about your life have demonstrated to them that person, those people are different? Those people are peculiar. Christians in the first century Peter said, lived that way. They were peculiar in worship. Their worship was in spirit and in truth. I think in John chapter 4, and this is something that I have come to in recent years. I thought for a long time that what Jesus was saying was spirit and in truth. Well, the spirit is your part. You have to be enthusiastic in worship and truth. That's we have to do it the way God tells us to do. The problem with, in my mind, the problem with that interpretation in John chapter 4 is God required the Jews to do it for the right reasons too. I mean, there are times, Isaiah chapter 1 is a good example. There are times in the Old Testament where the Jews, where the Israelites were doing the right things, and God rejected it. And He rejected it because they weren't doing it for the right reasons. They weren't doing it with their hearts. I have more to say about that, Lord willing, in tomorrow night's lesson. So the worship is spiritual. The worship of the Israelites was physical. They had a place where they had to go. They had sacrifices that they had to offer. They had to offer those sacrifices through priests who were human beings. They were men. And Jesus tells the Samaritan woman, your temple's up there on Mount Gerizim, or it was. By the time Jesus was there, that temple had been destroyed. And our temple, which Jesus says to the Samaritan woman, our temple is right. Our temple is right. It's on a hill back here in Jerusalem. But listen, the time is coming when place won't mean anything. Those who worship God, the worship will be spiritual worship. And it will be worship in truth. And so we don't have to go to a particular place. We can worship God right here in Russellville, Kentucky. And we can worship God in Bowling Green, Kentucky. And we can worship God in the Philippines. And in Japan. And in Russia. And in China. And we don't have to offer sacrifices. One perfect sacrifice has been offered that suffices for all people for all time. And we don't have to go to priests. We are priests. We are the priests. Everything about it is spiritual. Their worship was different. You have in Acts chapter 2 and verse 42, I think, in capsule form, you have kind of a preview of what this spiritual worship was going to look like. The gospel has been preached. People have responded. And in Acts chapter 2 and verse 42, it says that they continue. Let me get turned there. Acts chapter 2 and verse 42. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and the fellowship, to the breaking of bread, and to prayers. I would suggest to you that four of the things that came to be associated with worship when Christians assembled together in local churches are found in that verse. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, Luke says. And that's what we're doing tonight. During the last 30 or 35 minutes, we've been devoting ourselves to the apostles' teaching. He also says that they, not just the apostles' teaching, but to fellowship. I suspect, there's another one of those opinions, kind of, but I suspect that fellowship is a reference to the sharing of their material things that we're going to see by the time we get to Acts chapter 4 and 5. The word fellowship is very often used in the New Testament to refer to the collection that we take up, and especially a collection that's taken up for the purpose of assisting or helping needy saints. And so the sharing together of their things, breaking bread, I think that's the Lord's Supper, prayers, which we've already done tonight. The only thing that it doesn't specifically mention is singing, congregational singing. But what you have in Acts 2 verse 42 is you have the beginnings, kind of a bare bones outline of how the worship was going to be different. Just simple little things. We're going to study God's Word, the Apostles' Doctrine. We're going to sing. We're going to pray. We're going to have fellowship, and that fellowship will include, among other things, if we have people who are suffering, if we have people who have needs, we're going to pool our resources, and we're going to meet those needs. We're going to take care of those needs. And what we know from New Testament or from post-New Testament writings, late in the first, early in the second century, is that kind of worship was revolutionary. I mean, nobody in the world is doing this. It is radically different from the way the Jews worshipped. It is radically different from the way that the pagans worshipped. Their worship was peculiar. As a matter of fact, if a lot of people in Logan County were to walk into this building on Sunday morning at 10, let's make it 10:30, and find a seat, maybe sitting in the back someplace, and find a seat and just watch what you're doing, I promise you they're going to go out in the parking lot and get in their car and drive away, and they're going to say, that was weird. That was peculiar. You know, there was no piano. There was no organ. There weren't any drums. During the Lord's Supper, people just sat there quietly. Nobody raised and waved their hands. Nobody shouted. There weren't any miracles performed. People will view this worship as peculiar. I promise you that they will. But I tell you this, though, I think there are a lot of people out there who are looking for this. And maybe our job is to try to help find them. But they were peculiar in worship. Their worship was distinct. They were peculiar in knowledge as well. It says in Hebrews chapter 8 and verse 11, they shall not teach each one his neighbor and each his brother, saying, know the Lord, for they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest. You know, Jews had to be taught about God, because they were born Jews. And they didn't know anything about God at all. So they had to be taught. But that's not the case with God's people. You won't have to teach them about God. They know about God before they come to God, before they obey the gospel. They already know about God. But I think there's more to it than that. I think what he's saying is God's people know God, and God's people know about God. There was a time, historically in this country, there was a time when members of local churches of Christ generally were known as people of the book. You may not agree with those folks who worship over there at the Northside Church of Christ. You may not like what they do. You may not agree with what they teach about the plan of salvation. But I'll tell you one thing, those people know the Bible. I hope and pray that's still true. I'm afraid that broadly speaking and generally speaking, it's not. And that the world would not necessarily look at us as people of the book anymore. I was preaching in a place in another state, make that clear, and in another state that does not adjoin Kentucky. You make that clear also. And the heater in the baptistry went out. We were north of the Mason-Dixon line, and it was in winter, and it was cold. And so the baptistry heater needed to be repaired. I wanted it repaired. If I'm going down in there, even in waders, I want the water to be a little bit warm at least. And so we had to get a plumber to come and do the work. Well, generally speaking, a little bit of sarcasm here. Just know that. Okay, during the week, you got somebody who's got to come and do some work in the building. Who has to stay there all day and wait for them to get there? Well, the preacher, of course, because he doesn't work except on Sunday and Wednesday night, right? And so the elders came to me and said, we got a plumber coming on Tuesday. He'll be here sometime between 8 and noon. We need you to be there. And I said, I can't be there. I'm not even going to be in town. And so they got, one of the deacons who did night shift work agreed to come from work straight to the building, and he would be there, and he would wait until the plumber came. So the plumber comes, and the plumber's up in the front of the auditorium, and he's working on the baptistry, and the deacon's standing there watching him. And the plumber's just making casual conversation, said, hey, I noticed when I came in that y'all don't have a piano. Y'all don't have an organ. Why is that? And I have to tell you in shame and embarrassment that the deacon couldn't answer the question. His first instinct was to run to the track rack to see if we had a tract on instrumental music. Well, we didn't. He tried to call me, but this was pre-cell phone days, and I wasn't home. He tried to call some of the elders. He wasn't able to get a hold of any of them. He finally had to just say to this repairman, I can't help you. I can't answer that question, but I can put you in touch with somebody who can. I think that is tragic. But I tell you, brethren, I think it's not necessarily untypical. And I'm not looking for an answer, but let me ask a question. You are here tomorrow, and the repairman comes in and he says, no piano, no organ. Why? Could you open your Bible and teach this repair person, shouldn't say repairman, right? Teach this repair person Here are the scriptural principles that dictate to us that we have no authority for using mechanical instruments of music in our worship to God. Well, let me tell you something, brethren, that's pretty basic. I mean, that's pretty elementary. That's not meat. It's maybe not milk. It's maybe it's like oatmeal. It's somewhere in between milk and meat. But it's not brain science. It's not rocket surgery. I was just checking to see if anybody was still with me at 8 o'clock. God's people in the first century were unique in knowledge. They believed and appreciated that all Scripture is inspired by God. God breathed and is profitable for doctrine, reproof, for correction, instruction in righteousness. They were heeding Peter's command in 2 Peter chapter 3 and verse 18 to grow in both grace and in the knowledge of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. May I suggest one more, and the lesson is yours. And you notice that I squeezed this into the outline, and I did this because I've just added this recently. But New Testament Christians were unique in regard to their speech. Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person. The idea of being able to speak graciously is a lost art in the 21st century in the United States of America. And I'm afraid we can fall victim to that. We need to be so careful how we speak. How we speak. And I'm not talking about being judgmental. I mean, judging is a part of what it means to be a child of God. But we can judge and still our speech be gracious and seasoned with salt. And the reason that I've added this to the list is because I want to take it one level beyond what you say with your mouth. And I want to apply this to what you say with your fingers. If I were given the privilege of looking at your Facebook and all the things that you've posted, let's take me out of the equation. If the elders of this local church were to have access to your Facebook page and they could see every post that you have made, would they draw the conclusion that this person's speech is gracious, seasoned with salt? If they had access to every tweet that you had sent, what else? Instagram, I'm trying to think. There are other things. I'm way behind, guys. I'm still trying to figure out how Facebook even works. You know, it's somehow or another, I think Christians who, if you were talking to them face to face, I think you would probably hear gracious speech. But somehow or another, I think when they get behind Facebook, they get behind the keyboard, I can say anything I want to say. And I can say it any way that I want to say it. And I can be mean-spirited. And I can be unkind. And I could be overly judgmental. And we need to be so extremely careful. The people who follow us on social media, people in the world who follow us on social media should be able to look at our Facebook timelines, should be able to look at our Instagram pages, should be able to look at our tweets and all the things that we send out and see there's something different about them. There's something peculiar about them. Well, that's my lesson. A peculiar people. I know nobody likes to be peculiar, but I will tell you this as we extend the invitation. I don't think we have any choice. I don't think God has given us a choice in this. I don't think God is saying, you know, it's a good idea to be peculiar, but you really don't have to be. You're okay. If you want to just completely blend in with the world, that's okay. It seems to me clear that if we are not peculiar, then we don't belong to God. If we are not peculiar, then we're not going to get the benefits of the sacrifice of Christ, including every spiritual blessing in the heavenly places in Christ. If we are not peculiar, we won't receive God's grace. We won't be the beneficiaries of God's grace. If we are not peculiar, we don't have the hope of being in heaven with God. Only the peculiar people are going to be in heaven. If for no other reason, that should be motive, maybe motive enough. I want to go to heaven. And it's worth people thinking that there's something a little off about me. It's worth people thinking, that guy is different. There's something different, assuming that we're different in the right ways. So the invitation tonight is the question, are you one of God's peculiar people? If you've never become one, or if you became one at one time and have fallen back into the pattern of just trying to be like the world, we want to help you to get back into a right relationship with God. We want to help you, and we want to all help each other to be the kind of peculiar people who are pleasing to God in how we live our lives, so that we can all be together in heaven in eternity. If we can help you in any way in responding to the invitation, won't you please come down to one of these front seats and let us help you right now while we stand and sing.